Ladies and gentlemen, brace yourselves. You are about to witness the most notorious murder in cinema history. Meet a twisted teen slasher with knives for fingers, and come face to face with the world's most notorious power tool killer. All of these inhabit the volatile world of the Psycho Killer.
What really scares me? People. People really scare me, because people kill people. I don't know one person killed by a vampire or a werewolf or Godzilla. You know, I really don't. I mean, people scare the shit out of me.
Since Jack the Ripper terrorized Victorian England, the Psycho Killer has become a media phenomenon. Capable of unthinkable acts of sadism and slaughter, we are both fascinated and fearful of this new breed of gruesome celebrity.
There's a guy out there that's killing certain people, and you don't know where he's going to strike next. It means you could be the next victim.
They look just like us. They are just like us. And that represents a very chilling shift in horror films.
We kicked off the modern era. We made movies about Ed Gein.
In the late 50s, Ed Gein became America's first celebrity serial killer. His horrific crimes shocked the world, not simply for their monstrous nature, but because on the surface, this farmer had seemed so normal.
A nice man, just like anybody else.
Ed Gein is the poster boy for the psychopathic killer. Ed Gein is a guy in Wisconsin who killed a few folks and, you know, ate some flesh and wore their faces and danced in the moonlight. And he was insane.
The news broke of that. Everybody was horrified, totally horrified, because it shouldn't happen in this normal world we usually live in.
And legendary filmmaker Alfred Hitchcock was certainly watching.
I suppose it all started with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
One of the most influential films ever made, probably.
All-American Psycho.
In this house, the most dire, horrible events took place.
In 1961, master of suspense Alfred Hitchcock would release Psycho. Loosely based on the horrific crimes of Ed Gein, Psycho would kickstart the psycho killer genre and shock audiences around the world.
Psycho's brilliance, for me, is the way Hitchcock plays with you.
She looked like a wrong one to you? Acted like one.
You think it's a film about Janet Leigh is stealing something to be with her boyfriend, and you think it's about that.
On the run and late at night, Psycho's heroine Janet Leigh seeks shelter in the isolated Bates Motel, a choice which would turn out to be the worst accommodation arrangement in the history of film.
It's obviously a place that has been left behind. That's great. The old dark house in the middle of the woods, and it turns suddenly, becomes a movie about this lonely guy in a motel.
You have a vacancy?
Oh, we have 12 vacancies. 12 cabins, 12 vacancies.
But Psycho's real star was Norman Bates, seemingly the archetypal boy next door.
This extraordinary performance by Anthony Perkins. He's boyish, he's charming, he's using every single element of his sort of Ivy League, charismatic, virginal, damaged youth.
Is your time so empty?
No. Well, I run the office and tend the cabins and grounds and do little errands for my mother.
And here he is, you know, with those birds nailed up on the wall behind him. And Janet Leigh walks in with those 38 Bs, that bustier from Madonna breast. I mean, this isn't a cold Hitchcock heroine now. This is Janet Leigh, who's definitely warm. Think about the opening scene in that movie. You know, she's laying there in a brassiere making love to John Gavin on a bed. We hardly saw that back then in movies, unless they were from France. Hey, bad kittens have sex. We have to kill you.
Psycho would establish the rule that would dominate the Freudian world of the psycho killer movie. Sex equals death.
You know, had a little mousy librarian showed up, you know, Norman Bates might have been all right, but Janet Leigh was the catalyst.
She's going in to wash away her sins, literally in this shower.
Janet Leigh in the shower scene really epitomizes every woman's fear. Here she is, naked. She's in a shower. There's all this clean water. It's a safe environment. And to have this happen to her, this monstrous attack, it is profoundly shocking for anyone who watches.
The power of this iconic scene was further intensified by the revolutionary music and sound design.
You never see that dagger go into a body. You hear the noise.
All of a sudden the violins go up to the top and then... You know, I mean, that sound goes right to your nervous system, and you're frozen to that.
It sounds like a knife. That's what the strings sound like. They're high-pitched. They sound like a knife cutting you.
She was the star, and she's murdered. It's like, wait, what? I mean, that was really radical.
Psycho had rewritten the rules for the scary movie. The blood had been spilled, and for the Psycho killer film, there was no way back. And as he entered the 1970s, he would become increasingly volatile, and his killings even more senseless.
Why did horror movies of the 70s become more violent? And I have Vietnam.
Beautiful friend.
By 1975, 200,000 young American soldiers had been slaughtered in the hugely unpopular Vietnam War. This was carnage on a grand scale that would rip apart the American psyche.
The 70s, there was such an explosion of violence in cinema.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out, of course, during the Vietnam War. It's explicitly a commentary on the butchery that was taking place during that conflict. Here we have senseless, mindless, visceral violence.
From the opening frame, you knew you were doomed. Once it started, it never stopped.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre centered around a group of teenagers seeking help at an isolated farmhouse after their van breaks down. And whilst the concept was nothing new, it was the execution, quite literally, that would raise the stakes for the perfect scary movie.
Hello? The opening scene in Leatherface's house, that scene when Kurt first gets it, is so scary because he's got this shot of this metal door, and there are these skins hanging, and he does a few cuts in, and he goes these weird pig noises, and you're like, is that an animal behind there? Is that a person?
He was hit hard enough to definitely force broken skull material down into the brain and most likely cause convulsions. I think that was, it was outrageous and startling.
Tobe Hooper needs to be watched at all times, needs to be regulated, because those are just evil ideas.
Door closed. That's it. No more information.
Kirk?
And when Pam goes there and they have that brilliant shot off the swing, you're slowly creeping, you're going, don't go in that house, don't go in that house.
And one by one, as the kids go to investigate, the rule of curiosity kills would be pushed to its grisly, unforgiving conclusion.
Yeah, he seems to bring the problems on him or herself by investigating something. But actually, that's kind of the way it is in real life.
Unlike his brooding predecessor Norman Bates, Texas Chainsaw's Leatherface was a much more chilling prospect.
He is a killer. He's obviously quite insane and quite violent. That's what, to me, made Leatherface such a terrifying character. He's not human, but he's almost human. He's the most horrific of things. He isn't a giant lizard. He's a human being who isn't human.
But just like Norman Bates, Leatherface shared the same terrifying heritage.
The idea of the mask was inspired by Ed Gein.
He would take people and skin them and then wear the skin.
He inspired that element of the film.
The spectre of Ed Gein may have loomed large over Leatherface, but it was his iconic choice of weapon that would earn him his place in the Horror Hall of Fame.
Stop!
What would that be like, you know, if you were attacked with that thing?
It has all the features that elicit our innate predator defense mechanisms. It moves, it has jerky movements, it has loud noise associated with it, and of course it has teeth. So much better than a gun.
One of the greatest moments in Texas Chainsaw Massacre is when you realize this girl is not going to be done in by a chainsaw, but she's going to be done in by Grandpa, the old guy who used to work at the slaughterhouse.
It was this sadistic torture scene of The Last Survivor that would give the world nightmares.
She says something like, "I'll do anything."
I'll do anything.
And there's a kind of implied sexual content. You know, screw me if that's what it takes to get me out of here. But when she says this, nobody reacts. They just keep right on doing what they do because it means nothing to them. The whole idea that she can defend herself or has anything to give them is just not true.
You kind of want him to kill her in one hit, but he can't quite do it. He's not strong enough, so it's making it worse. He's just beating her to death.
It's torture. So it's just the filmmaker torturing the audience as much as that character is being tortured. That's the key.
Finally, the viewer is thrown a morsel of respite when the girl escapes. But for many, this was too little, too late. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre would come under vicious attack and would ultimately be banned for its harrowing scenes.
Harper's Magazine did an article. It was a cover story called The Pornography of Violence. And it referred to Chainsaw Massacre. I love this phrase. They referred to Chainsaw Massacre as a vile little piece of sick crap with literally nothing to recommend it.
The genius of Texas Chainsaw Massacre is that it is remembered as one of the most violent, bloody, sick, gory films ever made, when in fact the film has very little violence in it. It's essentially a bloodless movie. People would walk out of that movie remembering seeing a girl impaled on a meat hook. You never see it. You see her face and you hear that noise, but you never see anything in that film. There's nothing on screen that will ever be more scary than what you have in your head. And the best horror filmmakers are the ones that evoke that. So that when you walk out of the theater, you remember the things that you imagined.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Psycho had laid the groundwork for the Psycho Killer movie. However, there was a final step in its evolution as it threw off its cultural baggage and streamlined itself to become a pure scare machine.
In the late 70s, John Carpenter came out with a movie called Halloween, which basically just got it all right. He got rid of the social commentary and the politics and just made a bang-on, pure, scary film.
Let's nail the audience to the back of the theater. That was the idea.